My name, I have several. Sylvia Gann Benge Mahoney. And when I was here in Lea County, I was Gann or Benge. I moved to Texas and became a Mahoney. So, okay. And my name is spelled Sylvia, Gann, Gann, Benge, Benge, Mahoney, Mahoney, as one of my students called me, Mahoney, and that's how it's spelled. So it made me feel good. I was born in Levelland, Texas, on the plains, part of the Llano Estacado, also a place where the sand blew, as it does here, even worse over there because everything was cultivated. And I can remember as a child, my dad was a dryland farmer, and all of the dirt storms came from the west. And I can remember being very small and watching those red dust storms move in. And I thought, I don't ever want to move west. That's where those storms come from. And I could remember they would roll in, and sometimes they were followed by rainstorms. And the neighbor had a cellar, and I have 3 siblings, and my parents would grab us all and head for the cellar, and there would be 2 or 3 different neighbors in that same cellar, and it would rain and lightning and everything, and come out, and there would be, remember being ankle deep in water, and then it was sandy land, and it soaked in rather quickly. But it was a good life. My parents loved each other, and they loved the kids, and my mother loved animals, and my dad was, he loved planting and growing cotton and maize, and my mother was Czech, and so she was a cook. Oh my gosh. We had the best food, and I just didn't know everybody, and we had fresh. I mean, we had freshly killed chickens, and we had our own eggs, and they would bring all of my mother's family over, and they would kill a hog and render it out and have hams and all. It was such a good life, and my mother made the best pastries and kolaches, and it was just a wonderful life to live like that. And in the evening, when the sun started down, it gets cooler, and I would go down, my sister and my dad would be coming in from the field on the tractor, and we'd walk down there and meet him, and he'd pull us up, and we'd sit up on the tractor and come home with him. And I can remember looking out across the land and thinking, I can see where the sky meets the earth. And it was just, I love the plains. And when I hear people think, this is ugly out here, I'm like, anybody can love a mountain and a tree, but if you can love the plains, you are into something very special. And I've always loved the plains. And being a dryland farmer, when my dad heard about the discovery of water and they could drill for it and had irrigation pumps, we bought a farm over north of Lovington, and about 7 miles north on the Tatum Highway. And we had one of the irrigation wells was on the corner on the Tatum Highway where you could see it, but we had an 8-inch pipe that flowed full of water. And it was amazing, and it certainly changed the nature of his farming. And it was a good life. We had cotton, maize, and in the fall we always had cattle, but he also had sheep that put it out on the crops what was left, and they'd eat the cotton and eat the maize that dropped down, and Mother always had a large garden. And we had a horse. We had one, a black and white, a paint horse, and we had such a good time riding Dolly. She'd put up with us for a while, and after church, my folks went to First Baptist Church, and after church, many times we brought a lot of kids home with us, and maybe 4 or 5 of us would ride her, and until she got tired of it, and then she'd hump up and we'd slide off, and that was it. But it was a really good life. And then eventually my dad decided to put in cage layers, and where you have chickens and you have them in cages and the eggs roll down, and they talk about free-range chickens now, and the eggs that are just so fine because of free-ranging hens. And I'm like, let's see now, have you ever been around a place? We had music playing for our hens all the time, and they really liked country western music too. And they would just sing, you could hear them singing, and they were fed regularly, they had fresh water regularly, and the eggs were always clean. And if they're not up like that, they get a lot of poop on them. Not a good thing. So, but anyway, it was a great life, and I enjoyed it. I grew up in Lovington, graduated from Lovington High School, and it was amazing. H.C. Pennell was superintendent, and when he became superintendent, it was during the time when oil had been discovered in Lea County, and the money had started flowing in for the school systems. And Mr. Pennell was a master educator, and he spent that money that came in on hiring the best teachers he could find in the United States.
Wow.
And I didn't know what a good education I had until I discovered what some others had. And for example, he hired Florence Anderson, and she was our music teacher. He found her in Minnesota and brought her to Lovington. And she started when I was in the 3rd grade, and she taught us all of the folk songs, and then we did Peer Gynt, and we did the Hallelujah Chorus, and she had a Christmas cantata every year. And Mr. Pennell, that was during the time when she said, all of the students in the high school will be in the Christmas cantata, even the basketball players and the football players. And they will come in at noon if they can't come in any other time, because they will sing. Well, it was amazing, and the town came out, and we had it in the gym, and it was the gym that's not the new facility now, but the one on the other side of town. And the whole gym on one side would be full, and we'd have all the high school kids, and we wore white tops. Everybody wore one, and you had this whole white setting. And we at our class reunions, we still have the class reunions, and we were talking about how the music that she taught us has kept us together as a class, because in Fort Worth, I go hear the Hallelujah Chorus every Christmas, and I put it on Facebook, and everybody responds, oh, I wished I could have been there. I wished I could have heard it. And you think about what music does. And she sold me on what it helps, because it's a universal language. And I just heard the other day that they are working with people that have Alzheimer's and strokes, and that their music is the only thing that they can remember, and they will do the rhythm with it, and they start to be able to bring forth these thoughts. So I'm an avid supporter of the fine arts. I think it's Miss Anderson, yes.
Wow.
And Mr. Pennell was walking, when I was in the 5th grade, he was walking down the hall one day, and he stopped to say hello. He's very nice. He was a very proper man, dressed nicely in his suits. Never saw him in anything but a suit and tie. And he walked down the hall, he stopped to speak to me, and he said, I'm going to put a student committee together that will be my committee, that you will help me understand the school and if there are needs, and I would like for you to serve on it. I was like, really? I'm amazed. And I walked on down the hall with him, and he said, I just want to show you something. He said, I walk down these halls and I can learn more about what is happening in the classrooms than any other way by the sounds coming from the rooms and the sound of the students' voices when they're talking, happy, not interested, whatever. And I discovered about 30 years later, I was reading, and this new administrative approach was walkabout administration. And I thought, and Mr. Pennell was doing it.
He was ahead of his time.
Ahead of his time in the 50s. And my English teacher, my junior year, was ahead of her time. Frances, well, we had a scholarship out here that our class put together with her. I'll think of it in just a minute. But she did all of these projects with us that was just amazing. Like we'd read a novel, and then she would put 4 or 5 of us together, and we had to take the main characters and create our own little plot. And we practiced, and I remember one of them was a bandit, and he was killed, and we had him covered up on the floor at my house, and we practiced, and then and everybody, see, I remember it all these years. And it was a beautiful education.
And it's very innovative.
Innovative. And Mr. Pennell hired Tasker from, before Hobbs got him, he was at wherever Tasker was, they ran into each other, and he started talking with him. He hired him on the spot, and he came to Lovington, and they won the state championship that year, 1949. And that is an amazing story. U.D. Black has written, he was in my class, and he's written 41 books. And he wrote one called The New Mexico Hoosiers, and he talks about, it was just the little wooden gym, and it didn't even have a regulation court on it. And nobody would come play. And so the team went out and played everybody else at their other schools, which is difficult. Usually home court advantage you depend on. And they went and played, and nobody ever talked about Lovington, never heard of Lovington. And Mr. Pennell's son, H.C. Pennell, who became a doctor later, Harlan Pennell, played on that team. And so did so many of the ranch, like Jerry Dean from the Dean family played. And it was just an amazing, but they went to Albuquerque, and they started winning against some of the schools, like, who is that? And they had to play against everybody then. They had no districts. There were no 4A or 3A or anything. They played everybody. And they won state in 1949. And Hobbs hired him for the next year and kept him for 30 years, I think. So there's some exciting things at the Lovington schools. And I was a cheerleader and enjoyed being a cheerleader, and I was FFA sweetheart. And I know they came to me and said, well, we're going to have a banquet. We want you to plan it and do the meal. And I'm like, I've never planned a banquet and done a meal. But it's amazing what you can do if you have to. And after cheerleader one year, I decided that I wanted to do something different to really prop up people's, cheering for the team. So I went to the funeral home and asked if I could borrow a casket. And they had an old wooden one of those designer caskets, wooden. And so they helped me load it in the trunk of the car, and we tied it in, and I went down the street with the casket in the trunk of my car. And we took it to the high school, and we were in the new high school. We were the first class, the class of 57, to be in the new high school. And we put a mannequin in there and put a helmet of the other team on it and put it there in the lobby. And we had a lot of fun. And I graduated there, and
How many were in your class?
98.
Oh, pretty
So,
good size then.
yes, and we've continued to have class reunions. We had one in Lovington in October, which was our 60th.
Congratulations.
And I said, well, we've still got quite a few. Well, we have 33 that are deceased, but we still have a lot of them, and people just, I keep an email list of all the class members and send out birthday greetings once a month and ask them to send notes to me, and we communicate that way. And we just had so many. I'd like to tell you about all of the degrees and what everyone did, but have to move on to New Mexico Junior College, but it is amazing the quality of students that came out of this because of the teachers and because of Mr. Pennell, who expected us to excel, and there was no funny business. And the principals of the high school were, I mean, my classmates talk about, well, I didn't do that but once, and that sort of thing. And there was a gentle discipline that kept people understanding that you should do what you should do. But they didn't get away with things they should not do. And I think when you know there's to be a little punitive damage here or something, plus I would have never let my mother and dad know I'd done anything, so I didn't. And I think that was a lot of the students felt that way about their parents. So I was, when I graduated, I was going to Baylor and had a roommate, and I'd been going with Benny Benge, and they had an oil boom in the Four Corners in northern New Mexico, and we decided to get married, and he could make some money up there, and it was, I've had a very in reverse life. I've done things later, but I feel like it's always worked out so well for me. I went up there, and it was an amazing experience because we moved to Aztec, and I experienced the Native Americans, and they had a dormitory there for the students to come in, and they had to live in the dormitories during the winter away from their parents. And I thought, oh, how sad. How could you be away from your parents? But they did, and I experienced that, and then the oil boom, and there was no places for people to live. We had a trailer house, a new one, and moved it there, so that was quite nice. And he then got a job with El Paso Natural Gas Company, and it was a good job. And we moved out to Ojito, which is a trading post right on the edge of the Hickory Apache Reservation. That was an experience because they came to, it was dirt road where we lived from Cuba. It was 25 miles on dirt road. And the Indians still came to the trading post in wagons. And there were dugouts, and we had a trailer park. There were 3 trailers in the trailer park, and then the trading post. And there were 2 dugouts with like cellar doors on them, and the Indians would come get their supplies, and then they would park out there and sleep in that dugout at night if they were there too late to go back home again. So it was really an interesting experience, and the people that lived back there so far never told you their names because most of them were out there for some reason, and they didn't want anybody to really know who they were. And it was an interesting experience.
Early 60s?
It was in the late 50s.
Late 50s?
Mm-hmm. We left there in 61. And it was a fascinating world to be a part of. And I went to a shower one afternoon, and it was local people. And one of the women who had married there, they were both local, had a baby shower for her. And I went and met all of the local people, and the punch had white lightning in it, and the children were drinking it, and they brought for gifts eggs, and meat and just things you needed back in the woods.
Yeah.
And I
Very
know
logical.
it was, and I'm like, oh, this is a different life than I'm used to. It was amazing. And I know George was a friend of the men, and he had long curly hair, and he lived with his parents, and he was probably 25, and they just threw their trash up on top of their log cabin. And it was just piled up, but we had a German Shepherd dog, and when anybody that came up that was strange, she would just bare her teeth. And I know when George came, I always wondered why she feared him so much, because she'd get back on her hind legs and her teeth, and I knew when I heard that George was coming up. And George's mother sent a note to us and said, don't be making pineapple turnover cake for him. You're making him too fancy, and he's going to expect things like that. And it was interesting. And at the trading post at Lindrith, they still had buffalo nickels that they gave out in change. So things didn't change back there.
Yeah.
And I voted there the first time, and I registered and I went to vote, and they had a little library out front of the school, and the library was about the size of this room. And when I went in, somebody at the door handed me a list, and I looked at it and I said, what is this? And she said, this is the way we'd like for you to vote.
Oh, really?
And I thought, I never heard of that before. And I didn't use it, but I thought, that was right there at the door when you went in. So it was, I went at one day, there were 3 of us and had the trailer houses, and one of the ladies had had a baby in Lindrith, and they had one doctor, or you had to go to Albuquerque or Farmington, and had him circumcised and brought him home, and her husband went to work, and she called, we didn't have phones or anything out there, and she walked over and pounded on my window. I lived next door, and she said, I need your help. And I came over there, and apparently the stitches or whatever on the circumcision, the baby was bleeding, and his diaper was solid blood. And she said, I'm afraid he's going to die. I need your help. And I said, you know, nobody else was around, and I wrapped him up, and she just had this baby, and she couldn't travel 25 miles. And so we didn't have car seats or anything, you know, wrapped him up and laid him in the seat, and I prayed all the way, don't let him die, don't let him die. And I got to the doctor's house, which was his office in the front, and the woman came to the door, his wife, and she said, well, he's gone to a chicken fight, and he'll be back after a while. And there were no phones, and so she said, come on in and we will, and she said, all I know to do is get oxygen and hold it up to his nose so that he at least has this oxygen. And I mean, we neither one knew what to do for bleeding circumcision. And I just sat there and I thought, don't let him die, don't let him die. And the doctor finally came in, and, you know, he did what he needed to do, and he quit bleeding. And I took him home because nobody had a way to communicate.
Right.
And I know the wife that was there had made rhubarb pie, and she came in and she said, you have to have a piece of this pie. You can eat it and still hold the. So anyway, I took him back home, and he survived. And so it was an amazing experience, and I just thought it was wonderful because it was unique. I had never been around anything like that, and I know one winter we were there, we had 103 inches of snow, and I just thought it was wonderful, you know. And we usually, the roads we would try to get out, we went out when spring it started melting, it just turned to mud, and it was all dirt road. But we would go out when it froze at night. Is the only way you could travel out of that country. And it was, I had a baby then and washed all of her diapers by hand. And she was a healthy child, and I'd take her to the little clinic in Lindrith, took her to Albuquerque to a pediatrician when we really needed to have her checked. But it was an amazing experience that I look back, it was like going back 50 years in time.
Really, yes.
And experience in real life, you know, and George took us all up to the top of a mountain, showed us where they had a big burial site for the Indians. And we didn't disturb anything. And when I was climbing back down the mountain, I looked and there was some bone I could see, and I dusted it off, and it was a skull.
Oh my gosh.
And that was back in the 50s, and nobody had ever said, you know. So I thought, oh my gosh, and I took it home and put it in a box under the trailer to try to decide, what would you do with this, you know?
Really?
I did. And you know, it got to bothering me, and I thought, I've got some human's head under my trailer. So I took it, and we climbed back up the mountain, and I put it right back where it was.
Yeah.
And I felt better about it.
I can
I've
imagine.
always been interested in Native Americans and their history and everything, so. But we moved back to Lea County. Benny decided to go into business with my father when he wanted to enlarge and have 25,000 laying hens. And we bought a house in town and raised our 2 kids in Lovington. And it was a really good experience, but when put my son, the baby, John Rayburn Benge, in the 1st grade, they opened New Mexico Junior College. And my daughter is 3 years older, Leslie Jo Benge Laughter, now spelled like laughter, L-A-U-G-H-T-E-R. But I started to school, and we studied at night together at the table. I'd bring my homework, they had their homework, we all did our homework together, and everybody helped, but I went to school only when they were at school. And I thought, well, I'm gonna get 2 years, and if anything ever happens and I have to work, I will at least have 2 years. But by the time I got to the end of and had my AA degree, I thought, Some of them I went to school with said, let's drive on to Portales. And so I started up there. But I loved the junior college. And Mr. Pennell had been the first president so that he could hire the faculty. I had the most amazing instructors here at the college. He hired one biology teacher from Canada, and he told us about curling, and I'd never heard of the sport of curling. And I just found so many interesting things with the faculty that he had hired. He just could spot a good one. And this college had the best faculty members that they could have ever had. And I benefited from that and was just excited about the college because they cared about the education of the students, and the facilities were nice, they were new, and I was 10 years older than I would have been had I started when I graduated from high school. So I wanted an education, and I had intended to be an English teacher all my life. And I just really, I wanted to hear everything. And Gail Marsh Hopkins, I took her place when I came out here to teach, but she was my teacher. She taught British Lit, and believe me, there is nobody could have ever taught British Lit any better than she did. And when I started teaching, I said, I'm going to use your notes. I mean, because she gave us worksheets and all of that. She was a master teacher. I admired her immensely. And it was just, and I took art and had wonderful art teachers that the history of art, and I just
Remember any of their names?
I was trying to
That's hard. I
think.
don't remember
who the art teacher was. I know that he has piercing blue eyes, and when he was telling you something and he looked at you, you were like, I've been looked at. I mean, he wasn't doing it to make you, I was just sitting there wanting to learn, and I learned about all of the columns from Greece and the structures and the famous artist, and he took us through an in-depth, and I also had my history teacher for world history. I can't believe I can't think of his name, but believe me, he had made pictures of everything in world history and had them on slides, and when he taught it, he showed you. And I know I took 90 pages of notes for one test.
Wow.
And when you got in to take his test, he expected you to answer using those 90 pages. I learned more about world history, and I love world history.
Right.
And when I started teaching myself, I finished 2 years here and drove to Portales and finished my degree there, a Bachelor of Arts. And it was an experience driving. I never stayed there. I came home because my children and I wanted to be there in the mornings when they left for school and go during the day and be home then.
That's a lot of driving.
It was a lot of driving. It's 86 miles from Lovington to Portales.
Wow.
And we came home one night. I had to take one night class. They had one English class required on Monday night at the college in the spring semester. And there was no way around it. And there was one lady that had to go on Monday night too, and we were coming home, and it was my car, and the lights went out.
Oh.
And it was a sandstorm.
Oh.
And we thought, you know, on up crossroads and up there, there's no shoulders on the road. You can't pull off. And so I had a flashlight. And my friend, even though the sand was blowing and it was on her side, she put her arm out and she held that light up so we could see the highway enough that we made it to Tatum, and then we were on our way home then. I mean, I thought it was rather innovative to be able to, because we didn't want to be stranded up there on that road at all. So I did get my bachelor's degree, and I remember one thing that was just so significant for me was at graduation, the person in line behind me was blind. And I was just bowled over that he had gotten a degree. And he said, do you mind if I hold your elbow, you're in front of me, so that I can follow you? Amazing. But I got my degree. There were no positions opened in Lovington to teach there. And it was during the time there were plenty of teachers, and with the new college, people had started to get degrees. And so I put my application in at Hobbs, and all summer there was no openings for them. And the week school started, they called me and they said, we have a woman who has resigned, and we'd like you to come down and visit with us about taking her job. And so they gave me the job, and I started to work, and amazing school system. They had 18 full-time English teachers, and they were the most giving, fun, enjoyable, but outstanding English teachers. And I just had the best experience learning from them, and they gave me handouts that they had treasured for years. And I just felt very lucky to be there. And Mr. Tidings was the superintendent, and I got to know him.
So there
Which-
was no competition between y'all?
No, and I have heard people talk about, well, they even shut their doors so you can't hear what they're saying, and I'm like, well, they didn't. They'd come and put it under the door or something and say, here it is, you know, and we had more fun. And I know the students would say, do y'all drink in the lounge? Y'all laugh so much. And I said, we don't have to drink to have fun, you know, and it was good. I taught there 5 years, but I had my eye on the college. And when I started teaching, I made a vow that I was coming back to New Mexico Junior College to teach. So when Gail Hopkins left, well, I applied for her job, and I was very lucky to have gotten that position. And it was such an outstanding experience here. And the administration was open to suggestions, and they would listen to you, and I felt comfortable talking to them. And when I came, I'd only been hired in August, and it was really interesting because they said, well, you are going to be in charge of the rodeo club, aren't you? And I said, no one's mentioned that to me. And they said, well, Gail was doing that. I said, well, I didn't rodeo. They said, well, if you don't do it, nobody else is going to, because nobody else will do it. And of course I knew, I'd raised in the county, and LeJean Burnett and I had been cheerleaders together, and old Baldy, I had taken a picture of him with my little brownie camera when I was in the 3rd grade, and they showed him on the football field one time. So I had a real affinity for horses and cowboys, and so I said, well, a club, okay, I'll do that. And that was August. September, the college trustees decided that they would put rodeo into the athletic department as a sport so it could be funded. And so I became, with the vote of the board, a full college rodeo coach.
Wow.
I was only the 3rd one in the nation. And I thought, well, my philosophy's always been, if you don't know how to do something and you want to do it and feel you should, go find the very best people that you can find that you respect for what they can do, and tell them your need. And I have done that several times, and I have never had anybody turn me down. And Tuffy said, they can come out and rope at my house. And that was enough to recruit almost anybody. And we had like Bootsy down at, the boot shop, and they started raising rodeo scholarship money because we had no scholarship. The college would pay my gas, but they had no vehicle for me to go in. So I drove my own car, and I thought, well, I'm committed. These people, the ranch people, Tuffy and them, built the arena out here and gave it to the college and said, we want a rodeo program. Well, how can you turn anybody down that's already proven they want a rodeo program? Yeah. And they had about, there must have been 5 or 6 stalls. And that wasn't much, but the arena was there, and it was on the rock hill up there. I drove up a while ago and looked at what a magnificent facilities up there now. But when you pioneer in something, you can have a lot of fun. And I had to hire a rodeo contractor to come, and I put on a rodeo. And Betty Gale Cooper, I called her and I said, okay, give me a list of what I have to do for a rodeo. And we were good friends and known her all her life. And so she wrote up what I needed to do and who I needed to contact as a contractor. And I know one time Harry Vold and Dan Berry came, and Harry, he's the Duke of the Chutes and was such a respected, wonderful man. Anytime I ever said, hello, Harry, he took his hat off and put it over his heart. And I thought, you do know how to treat a lady. And he always did it. And I saw him until he died last year. And it was sad to see such an amazing person, but he left such a legacy. It was just amazing. And that was how my rodeo career was. I went, after I became the coach, I knew I had to do some recruiting, so I went to Albuquerque, and they were having the New Mexico high school finals. And I walked in, and the first person I saw was Fern Sawyer.
Yes.
And Fern said, "What are you doing here?" And I told her what I was doing. She said, "You just come on, and I'm going to introduce you to the right people." And she took me around and introduced me to all of the right people who had kids and that she thought would be good to come to college. And then I sat in her box, and how can you not enjoy something like that?
A legend of Lea County.
A legend. And
yeah.
she was one year, the first year the college finals was held. It was always in Bozeman when I started, but then Bozeman they just kind of started being lackadaisical about having them. So they moved to Louisiana, to Lake Charles, and that was the first year I went in 1979. And I took my daughter and her fiance with me. And Fern called me and said, "I'm coming down to judge Miss Rodeo America, and can you pick me up at the airport?" And you know, Fern, my daughter had never met Fern, and here's Fern, this tiny little woman with these beautiful boots, you know, and their tops, pants down in there, and she had on a turquoise belt buckle that, you know, you could have had dinner on. It's so large. And she wore her hair back, you know, and all this jewelry and everything. And she said, I picked her up and had Leslie and Steve with me, and she said, "I'm hungry, can we stop someplace?" And well, there weren't many places to stop, and we saw this cafe that was open and went in there, and I thought, here she is, with all this valuable jewelry on, and I looked around to make sure we weren't going to be attacked or something. And you know, Fern talked like a sailor, you know, and my kids were like, "Really?" you know. But she was a legend, you know, and just amazing, and a good friend always. I mean, she was always so nice to me and gave me good ideas, and I just really appreciated her. And like Tuffy, he did a lot of recruiting for me, and you know, they could go out there and rope anytime, and anytime you can rope with the legends of Lea County. And Tuffy was one of the best teachers for ropers that has ever been. And I finally figured out why he was so good, why his kids did so well, was that he taught them to rope correctly to start with. They didn't ever have to redo or relearn or change. He knew how to teach them, and he was very observant. And he could tell you, I picked this up from so-and-so roper, and I picked this up from so-and-so roper. And it was just absolutely amazing, because those kids, they didn't have to relearn anything. And I watched my kids, I call my kids the contestants, the students here at the college, but I watched them closely enough to realize that when you get backed into that box to rope and you get nervous, you go down to the common denominator, which is the basic knowledge to start with. They would rope wrong every time if they'd been trained wrong. And they would drop down to that level, and this where they knew that they should rope like this, but I have this, they would come down to the lower level. And I thought, ooh, you know, if people, that's why kids are getting better, because parents have learned to watch, and well, the rodeo schools have made a world of difference. Because if you really wanted your kid to rope right, go to a Roy Cooper school. And they trained them. So I believe one of the reasons that they're so much better now is that because they have benefited from these roping skills to learn it correctly. Yes, and like Roy, he didn't know how to do it wrong.
Right.
Because he'd been trained to do it right. And I love those Cooper kids. You know, I had Clay Cooper in my class at Hobbs High School. And he's just so fine, so fine. He didn't do what he mentally was capable of doing. And on Facebook recently, he apologized to me and he said, you just gave me, you had so much faith in me and I just did not perform and I want to tell you I'm sorry. And I said, I always knew that you would be able to succeed because you did try, and he was just a nice kid, but those are good kids, but ranch kids are good kids.
Right.
And I was walking into the Coliseum at the finals one year, and the Odessa College trainer was there, and he had just taken on the training of the rodeo team. And I said, well, what do you think about rodeo kids and as a trainer? And he said, I love them better than the other sports. And I said, tell me why. And he said, because those horses will kick somebody with a world champion buckle on just as fast as they'll kick anybody else, and it keeps them honest. And I thought, you're right. They have to get up in the morning, go feed, they have responsibility, and you don't have a $100,000 horse out there in a stall that you don't love.
Right.
And you go feed them first, and you know, you feed your horse first before you eat yourself.
That's right.
And I just had learned to love the rodeo life and the huge family that it is. Something happened to a kid at New Mexico Junior College, and it wouldn't be 30 minutes and they'd know it in Washington State. And that was before cell phones. And you know, they'd come through and never paid for a hotel. They would stay in somebody's room with them, or all the ranch people around here, they just pull up and spend the night with them, sleep on the floor or whatever, and rope at their arena. And everybody knew everybody, and they all took me in and treated me beautifully. And it was just I could tell you, well, I wrote a book on it, College Rodeo from Show to Sport. Texas A&M Press published it in 2004. And I did that because when I was coaching, I realized that there were no records of college rodeo that anybody could get to. And the only records they had were in the national office, and they had a flood one time. And so after I quit coaching, I taught here at New Mexico Junior College for 10 years. But then I married and left, and I'll finish my rodeo story with that. But I went to Vernon College, and I married John Mahoney, who was the coach at Sul Ross. And he had had national champion teams, men and women, and Tuff Hedeman, who's here today, was one of his students, and he's just amazing. And he had lots of, like Guy Allen wrote for him, and Krill Pearson wrote for him, and I learned all of these kids through all of them, and it's just a beautiful thing to be a part of that world, because good people. And Tom and Ruth Pearson, when Krill was roping, they went to every finals and every rodeo, and we would always laugh. I saw Krill recently, and I said, remember how much fun we had with Bubba? That was all I had to say. We had so much fun. And I fell in love with them. They're just people of the word. You can trust them. And when you get in a truck and haul from here to Montana with them, it's just a good life. And I was really, really, I thought just because I was appointed a rodeo coach, I discovered a beautiful world. And it's just, it's a bedrock for our country. The New Mexico Junior College Board of Trustees, and Mr. Tidings was the interim president, decided that they would enlarge the Castor Activity Center. And as a coach, I met with the coaches, and we had a meeting, and Mr. Tidings told the coaches what was going to be done and asked for input from them for things that they wanted. And then after the meeting was over, Mr. Tidings walked out with me, and he said, I didn't see a thing in there for rodeo. And I thought, how nice of him to even consider that. And I was thinking about that because he was an amazing man. And I went home and I got to thinking about it. And when I was teaching at Hobbs High School, I had a Southwest Lit class. And I always invited Tuffy to come speak to my class, a real champion cowboy. And he would come speak, and he had said we had 56 world championship titles that had come to cowboys and cowgirls in Lea County.
Wow.
56.
Wow.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, you know, and I got to thinking, I'm kind of a numbers person, and I thought, I bet there's no other county in the U.S. that has that many championships. And I got to thinking about that, and so I put a proposal together and took it into Mr. Tidings, and I said, I have decided on something for the gym. And he said, well, what do you have? And I showed him and told him, and I said, I think if we could have some showcases built in the front of the gym in the lobby where they come in to buy their tickets, and put these world champions on display in those showcases, it would even bring people in to see those. And he listened to me, and he looked at me, and he said, don't you dare tell anybody else about this. This is too good, and we don't want the College of the Southwest to get it. And he said, let's call Tuffy. And he called Tuffy, and Tuffy came in, and we started talking about it. And by the time we got through having several meetings, we had 5,000 square feet designated in Castor to be the Lea County Cowboy Hall of Fame and Western Heritage Center. And I went through, then Mr. Tidings, he said, well, you brought the idea in, you get to be the executive director. And that was another one of those, because I couldn't say no. That proved to be such an amazing experience for me. And John Shepard, we sat down with an attorney, and I learned how to write bylaws. And it was, you know, so that we could have the Western Heritage Center. And we, in the museum, and Tuffy picked the board. There were 9 ranchers on the board and 4 college people. I was on the board. The Mr. Tidings, well, he was going off that year, and Dr. Anderson came. He was on the board, and the chairman of the Board of Trustees was on the board, and Vice President John Shepard. Well, you have that powerhouse on that side. And then you had like Daisy Clayton, one of the largest landowners, ranchers in the state of New Mexico, Desi Sawyer, Merle McNeil, you know, this beautiful needle point screen in the, that is an amazing, she had that made because she was a master needle pointer. And one of those, each block of that, well, she had a priest who was noted for designing needlepoint, and he came from Dallas, and we told him what we wanted in it, and he designed it, the different panels. And Merle asked master needle pointers around the U.S., and one was even from Europe, who made one of the screens, and he designed it, and then they sent that and said, we want this in these colors. And they put these different panels together, and then she took it to Santa Fe, and she said, I do not want any nails or man-made things in this. It has to be wooden. And she had someone put it together with the wooden pegs. Wow. And a very expensive, one-of-a-kind, rare, I mean, it in itself would bring needle pointers in here from the world if they even knew about it being here, you know.
Right, wow.
And it was a beautiful experience to go through that. And and once we got our 5,000 square feet, it had the like theater chairs in it with the good seats and and we had about 20 of those in there. And Jim Harris, Dr. Harris, took advantage of it, and he knows everybody in the literary world. All of the well-known poets and authors in New Mexico and Texas, he invited for different speakers. And we always had the place full. And I met all these wonderful people, and like Elmer Kelton. I mean, he came, and such an humble man, and he was always so nice to me. And I joined the Texas Folklore Society because Jim was in it. And I was encouraged to write by meeting everybody there. I'd already written at least one book, some of them 20 or 30. And I'm like, well, maybe I could do that too. So Jim was instrumental in my expanding my world. And he was here at New Mexico Junior College and still is. Jim is such a good friend, and I always like to talk to him because he's doing exciting things, you know. And he came today to the Rotary Club while I was there, and it was just nice to to see Jim. And we traveled a lot, being in the English department. Jim and I and Laura Duda went to the English meetings of two-year schools, and we had such a good time. And we gave papers at these two-year school meetings, and we went to Arkansas and different places, and that was just such an enjoyable time to teach with Jim and Laura Duda. And Laura graduated from high school in Lovington, and she was just fun to be with, and Jim was, and it was just wonderful to have another such congenial department. And I could talk about a lot of the humanities teachers and, you know, the art department and everything. But it was the Hall of Fame, when we put it together and had the board and we started meeting, and the ranchers always paid for the dinner, and we met at the steakhouse that was right down here. I was looking at it when I drove by, and I was trying to remember the name of it. It's not that anymore, but we'd go in and have steak, and one of them would pay for it, and all of the College Board people were there, and we met, and we accomplished a lot. And Tuffy was so good about being able to, he was chairman to start with, and then Daisy became chairman. And our first induction, we put together, we decided to have a membership and let people join. And that way we could communicate with them and had their list. Didn't have email or anything then.
Very smart.
And it was that way you have people, and I send a newsletter to them and tell them what's going on. And we then asked them, you know, would they like to come to the first induction. And it was in November, and Daisy liked to do things grand. And for the first one, she decided, well, when you looked around Hobbs and said, where can you have a dinner? Well, there wasn't anything large enough for 500 seated, and we were going to have tablecloths and servers, no buffet, none of that stuff. We didn't have any plastic, and we would have entertainment. And I put together, I went to the ranches of all the inductees and took pictures, and we had to use the carousel. And then I wrote a script and had Gary Sevier record it, and we played it out over the big system in the gym, you know, where they announced basketball games, where everybody could hear it well. And it was you know, to have 500 people come dressed to dine, and it was in the gym, yes. we, yes, and we put, they said, well, you can have it here, but you have to put canvas on the floor. Well, you didn't stop Daisy. We put canvas on the floor, and she wanted a chuck wagon put in there, so she had the wheels taken off, and it would just fit in the double doors. Moved it in like that. Put the wheels back on, set it over there, and we had the backdrop for pictures, and it was, and we had the large pictures made, the huge ones, and we found an artist that did all those and put those up. And it was, I mean, you take a gym and you can make a nice place. We put the pictures up along where the seats were folded up and had that up there. And everything went off beautifully well. At the time, some of the members didn't want their membership money being used to have a dance. So we had a dance at the country club, and it was not any of the membership money was used for the dance. Excuse me. And we went out there. It started to snow. We left out there. It closed down, I think, at 1 o'clock. And it had started to snow when we went home. It snowed 13 inches that night. So you think about, there was no movement with 13 inches. Nobody could get here. Everybody got home that night before the snow started, and nobody could get to the college until, I think it was Tuesday morning before any personnel returned, and I think that's when I returned. The basketball players lived around here, and they came to the gym, thought they would do a little practice, and found canvas floor and a chuck wagon on there. And I would still like to have had a picture of them walking in to see a chuck wagon on their basketball court. So we had lots of experiences. We had one dinner, and we continued to have our dinner in the gym every year. There was no other place, and we always had 450, 500 people who attended, and we had our steaks being cooked by a different group one year, and they all got drunk, and they didn't get steaks cooked. And we kept saying, they're going to be here in a minute. 1 hour they sat there waiting for the steaks to come. And Daisy finally said, you'll get those steaks out here. I don't care how you cook them, you get them cooked. And we got them cooked. We had lots of experiences like that. And it's nice to work with people who have been in business so long that they know how to handle it. I learned so much because they had been self-sufficient, run their ranches, run their businesses, been successful. And I loved to, Daisy and I went to Albany and went to the Fandangle, and she belonged to the Cattle Association, and they had a group meeting at a house there, and she said, we're going up here because these are some ranch people I know. Well, Watt Matthews was there, you know, and he was signing books. So I have Lamb's Head and his other book that he personally signed. Wow. That was a beautiful experience. Sure. And we went to hear fiddle players and had Johnny Kimball and a lot of the people that became famous. They came out here to play and entertain, and people came for the entertainment and for the induction. And we just had, it was just a wonderful, wonderful experience. Lots of work. I had one class release time to be rodeo coach, and not really anything for, no compensation, you know. I finally ended up getting $2,500 for rodeo coach. And I had one class release time. I taught 4 classes of English while I was a coach and executive director of the Hall of Fame. Whoa. And Daisy and I went through working with architects and telling them what we wanted, and we visited museums to look to see what we did want. I know one thing I asked for and I didn't get was, I said, we cannot have ordinary light bulbs in these exhibits.
Right.
And we did not get that.
Oh,
And
some things fade.
yes.
Yeah.
And I thought, why would you not do that? And of course I was, you know, you learn along the way to demand things that you know they're important, but we did not do that. We asked for it, but they didn't put it in, and we should have just made them put it in later, but how do you do that? So, but when I left here after 10 years, we had, Daisy wanted to have the indigenous animals, so the first, around the Hall of Fame, it was a different shape, and we started when you come in, and the first we had about, they were probably 10 feet glassed-in showcases, and the first one had the animals and had all of the, we had a designer come in and design all of these, and we had all of these animals that were indigenous, little, you know, prairie dogs, little prairie dogs and all of them, and we had to go through the Park Service to get all the approval for different kinds of animals, and we had the dugouts for, and had Joe Byers gave some things for the dugouts that his great-grandparents had used, and then we had Merrill McNeil went around the county and had the ones that played the fiddle for the dances at the Bull Barn in Lovington, recorded this and played it, and we had the dancers in there and had the original music from the ones that played at the dances. Wow. And we had these different, and then Daisy had all of her home, mother and dad's ranch furniture from their ranch, and she had one made with just that ranch furniture, like you know, an old-time ranch home. And then we were doing the agriculture one, but we did the oil one and had all of the oil and information, and then we had on around the room, we had the 5 towns, and started with Tatum, Lovington, Hobbs, Eunice, and Jowl, and each one depicted their history, and it was a boardwalk.
Oh, nice.
And it was set up with the roof, and each one of them you could come look into a store that had the history, and it was great. And then we had Giles Lee. We put in some of the county roping champions, and he kept meticulous records. So we had that, and our rodeo team with one of ours winning the second in the nation for the women's team. We had that, and I gave my jacket. That was, I coached for 7 years, and finally I said, I've got to have some relief. And so I thought, well, they can get a rodeo coach, and I haven't quite finished with my direction, what I'm trying to get done at the Hall of Fame. And so I resigned from that and continued with working with the Hall of Fame, and we got the building, and it just turned out beautifully. And we had the old pump jack made by Bill Zimmerman, for the pump for water and oil, and the front had a windmill and had a pond made. And we had, at our induction ceremonies, we had major Western artists who came and displayed their art. And we had them here. Some of the major artists here brought theirs in to show. And we had a lot of people come to see the art show and bought a lot of good art. I mean, several $1,000s for the paintings. And we had the Hall of Fame had this lobby, but it also had a place to go down into the gym, and so we put good art along the walls there. And it was, I enjoyed meeting so many of the good artists, and I did a lot of research on it, so I enhanced my life by getting to know more artists and knowing them personally. And of course, I appreciate music, but I also learned to really appreciate good art here, being the executive director and working with all of these people, because I had a half-time secretary. The other half was the gym. And it was amazing how much, I don't know whether I told you that when he told me, you're going to get to run this, I thought, if I'm going to run it, I have to find one of those people that knows something. So did I tell you about, I called the Museum of New Mexico there on the square in Santa Fe, and I told her my plight, and she said, you come spend a week with me and I will teach you how to run a museum. I spent a week in Santa Fe, and I had the most amazing time in Santa Fe. And I know one curator was named Tom Wolfe, and he became, I think, the executive director later in the years. But he took me back through all of those little cubicles where they had things from late 1500s, and you keep so much in storage, and showed me all that and how you document all of that, session them, and the records, and they showed me the records and how you do all of those and how you take things in to the museum and document them, and how you don't take things in that some want to give you. And I learned how to do that gracefully. And I learned a lot of the things that I wouldn't have ever known without her giving me that experience. So I felt that I knew the structure. Now all I had to do was call her or do some research. And I joined the Museum Association in New Mexico and met some amazing people and went to all these different museums in New Mexico. So my experience, New Mexico Junior College, just continued to give me wonderful experiences. Well, it was one of those moments in time that no one ever really knows all of the things that had to happen, but I decided one year that it was time for us. We'd had a couple of the men every year gone. We had never won a championship, but I had some money delegated for girls, and I decided I was going to spend it all on 2 girls. And so, of course, Tuffy gave me the names of 2 that should be winners. And so I recruited them with this money, and a team is 3, but we always had girls and have 2 good ones, and you just make those even better. And so they came, and Lorraine Higgins brought her boyfriend with her, who was Sean Burchett, who had already won a world championship in steer roping. And so he was a superb roper. So, I mean, that brings people in. And Tammy Noble, the Noble family, all 3 of their kids were really outstanding rodeo kids, and Tammy came. And Tammy had a really good year. Lorraine didn't have as good a year as Tammy did, but we qualified as a team to go to the finals, only to find out you have to have 3 people on a team. Well, we'd never had a problem having cowgirls. There wasn't one girl on this campus that wore boots. And I called Tim Corfield, who was the NRA commissioner, and I said, this is my problem, and I have 2 of the best girls in the nation. And he said, let me tell you something you can do. The rules do not say she has to have competed in a college rodeo. Wow. He said they just assumed you would, but you have special circumstances, and I'll okay it. You find you somebody who will come and qualify you by barrel racing. Well, Lorraine said, and Tammy said, our roommate is a tennis player. Let's talk to her. So they talked to her, and you should have heard them. They sold her on it. And she was kind of shy. And Lea said, come to my house in Arizona, and it was between May and when we went the third week in June, and we went to the finals. And Lea had an old Palomino horse that she had used as a kid to barrel race on. And she got Lori Wafer and showed her how to get around the pattern and how to kind of lope and make it. And we told her, your role is making sure these girls can compete as a team. And Lori went, and you have slack a lot to start with at the finals, and then they start the 4 performances. Well, Tammy and Lea drew up in the slack. Lori drew up in the first performance with an audience. And I thought, oh. I was standing there by the fence, and of course the girls were down there and had Lori, and you know, all you have to do is just lope around those 3 barrels and don't fall off and get hurt, but qualify. And there was this man standing there by me, I didn't know, but he said, and here comes Lori, and she went around and she was loping like you see the kids in the junior rodeo, you know, and she went around and, you know, and the horse was happy going slow. And the man said, that horse must be sick. And I wanted to say, you are seeing the best barrel race in this finals. She qualified them.
Oh my gosh.
And Lea ended up winning all around for the rodeo. And they didn't have computers then. I had no idea that, I mean, I knew what they had made, but I didn't have a list of all the other, because there were, probably 100 teams there. And you just can't keep up with everything. And when they announced the winners, the national champion was Betty Gale Cooper from Durant, Oklahoma, Southeastern Oklahoma State University, that had won under her all of these championships. And then the second place team was New Mexico Junior College. And I'm like, oh, say that again. I want to hear it. They had won second. It was in Bozeman, Montana.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
It was a moment in time that I'm like, oh my, I never dreamed we could win second. And 2 from Lea County, Betty Gale and I. And I thought, what a nice shared time we had.
Yes.
And it was just so wonderful.
Wow.
And Tuffy was there because he was judging the rodeo. So it was just the old home week from Lea County at the finals. And the record still stands here at the college. New Mexico Junior College opened up opportunities for me that I would never have had. 1, I got my education. 2, I went into teaching, and I love teaching English. And 3, I loved being a rodeo coach. And 4, I love history and collecting it. And all of this history I was looking at in the hall, and I thought, I'm so pleased this history's been collected, because most of them are deceased. And a lot of them were still here, and it's like the board. All of them are deceased that were ranchers. And I'm the only one. There's no, John Shepherd's deceased. Dr. Anderson, I don't know what happened, where he is. And the other 2, the trustees. Anyway, I think I'm the last living one of that 13-member board. But it was such an amazing experience. And to see what's been done, and to me, success is when you see you've started something and it's able to live on its own. And people come along and they can create and keep it growing and doing so many beautiful things that are being done here. And it just makes me so happy to see other creative people coming in and enhancing it, and like speaking to the Rotary Club of Hobbs today about the Great Western Trail, and have people come up and tell me how much the museum has meant to them here, and how they love the history that's been collected. And, you know, we had that small Western heritage part with all the cities and the history, and then all of the inductees, and then to have this with, I see so much happening for people to come out and bring their children, and that's so important to their life. And to me, it's one of the things that makes our country strong, is remembering the past. And you see, and we are also a pioneer land here in Lea County. Our pioneers did not come until 1918, 17, and there we had the open range ranching. But the pioneer spirit still lives here in Lea County. And you feel it, and you know it, because people do things, they're not afraid to do something. They're not afraid to think out of the box. They're not afraid to say, you know, let's build a Hall of Fame, you know, or here's a woman who will be the rodeo coach. Only 2 other ones in the nation. Why would we trust her to do that, you know? I mean, you think about it, and they fully approved it. In fact, expected me to do it. I mean, it's a beautiful place. And with Kelvin Sharp here as the new president, I could not be more pleased, because we were friends when he was a rodeo coach.
Great.
And he was a good coach and a highly respected coach. And his picture's in my book with the other coaches. And he fits this college beautifully. And, you know, I feel like this is kind of like, this is a sibling or a mother or the college is, because it gave me everything I needed. And it's being taken care of. And it's beautiful. And this museum is well, people ought to drive to see it. It's so amazing. And I see all the old movies that are being played, and I thought, I wish that we were there so I could go see those again. I just really think they're wonderful to be doing that, and to see all of the landscaping, and I mean, like this in the dark this evening. So, and it's all of this that I hear involved me in the Great Western Cattle Trail. And that too happened to me. I belonged to the Rotary Club. I started to work at Vernon College after teaching in Quanah for 8 years, which I loved teaching there. And I came to the college and was the director of institutional advancement. And so I was executive director with the foundation board there. I was also the photographer for the college and the marketing, which I liked all of them, you know, and I did all those. And the president of the college said, I want you to join Rotary. And he said, the college will pay for you to join, but being the marketing person, you need to join. So it has been a beautiful experience for me. And I went and joined Rotary, and I always went to the Cowboy Symposium in Lubbock, and I joined the Texas Folklore Society because of Jim Harris. And I went to all of those, and at the Cowboy Symposium in Lubbock, they were organizing a Chisholm Trail Association, and someone said, you ought to go up and listen. And well, I went and I met 2 men from Altus, which was just across the river from Vernon. And we were talking, and they said, we're planning to mark the trail across Oklahoma. Bob Clemmy, who marked the trail, Chisholm Trail, has offered to make metal molds for us to make Great Western Trail posts. And he will make the mold and get the foundry to do the letters for it if we will do that. And I said, why don't you come talk to our club? Because Vernon has a Doan's May Day picnic every year since 1884. The drovers' wives, when their husbands cross the Red River going north, people used to celebrate May Day, first day of May, and it came from Europe. And they have continued that celebration every year since 1884. And I said, this is the best kept secret I have ever heard of. And they have a king and a queen, a young king and queen they crown every year, and they put on the court and they wear these gowns and crowns and like they were in a ballroom. And then they have a picnic there. And it has been a social event and for years, and I was just amazed. I thought, why don't you have people from everywhere coming to this? But the people from Altus came down to the Rotary Club, and they came twice, actually. The second time they said, we're giving you a post to mark Texas, and we're challenging you, Texans, to mark your state if you love your state as much as we do. We're like, oh, really? You wouldn't talk to a Texan like that. You know? So our group said, well, Jeff Bearden, you have a chuck wagon and you are a reenactor. And David Crockett. And he said, Sylvia, we know you go to all the associational meetings and everything, and y'all just be the co-chair. Well, like you always do, we're like, sure, why not, you know? And didn't realize that it would take from 2003 until 2011, but we did get it marked in every state from Mexico into Canada.
Amazing.
And it was all self-funded, everybody who participated, and with emails. We'd call. I sent emails to Rotary clubs. I looked them up in the network online, and I'd find the president. I'd send him an email and tell him what we were doing. But we had one of our Rotary district governors got involved with it in our district, and he asked me to come to Corpus Christi to set up an exhibit because it was the Great Plains states. The district governors were going to be at the zone meeting. So 10-hour drive down there. I took it down there, set it up, and everybody was coming around looking. It just happened the Rotary International president-elect was there, and his aide, who later became a Rotary International president, but he was from New Zealand. And he was very interested, and I had a cowhide on the table and had all these fine pictures, and our museum director had put it all together, and she's an artist. And he came over and said, tell me about this. I don't know anything about things like this, and I'm interested. Well, all these district governors noticed he was over there wanting to know what is going on and, you know, follow the leader. Well, one of the district governors from Nebraska, Ogallala, came over there and he said, that trail went through Ogallala. We want a dedication. When are you coming? Well, we told him, you have to document your history and prove the trail came through there. We'll give you a post, and you have to put together a dedication that would make it worthwhile for us to drive from Texas or wherever else. And so we told our postmakers, well, they were at the Rotary Club then when I told them about all of this, and they said, we've made 110 of those 225-pound posts made of cement, and it said it takes a month to paint them, to make them, to cure them, and it's a weather inhibited a lot of times. They made them in the backyard. And they said, we're not making any more. But we will make one for each state, and let's make metal molds to give them. So I was working at the college, and I contacted the welding instructor, and I told him what we needed, and he said, I'll make those for you during Christmas break. And he did, made 7 of them. Wow. And that's another community college that made me so happy, you know. So we all loaded up and went to Ogallala and we had several pickups that had to load them because it was those 7 of those molds and 7 posts. And we took them and we invited people from the other Rotary clubs in the other states. And they came and picked up their post and their metal mold. And we said, we will come to your dedication. And so then we started quite an adventure. We had one when we had the second post dedicated in Texas, was at Bandera on Labor Day, and they had put together a trail ride to Dodge City. And so when we dedicated the post, it's in a park across the street from the courthouse, the trail riders came through. They had 50 wagons and 100 outriders. And they were headed to Dodge City, a 48-day trip. They had to make arrangements to go up the highways and everything. On October the 24th, they started Labor Day. Jeff took his chuck wagon, and we all went to Dodge City. And so Jeff came in with the riders when they came in his chuck wagon, and I was standing here, and I'm friendly. And so I started talking to the woman and realized that she was the Dodge City Rotary president. And she was also a Kansas representative. And I said, here's Jeff in his chuck wagon. And I said, we would really like to take that down White Boulevard and deliver it to Front Street, where they have El Capitan, a large bronze, and we were going to dedicate it there and put it in cement. And I said, is there any way you could get us an escort? She said, sure. She said, now I want to ride in it. I'm running for re-election. So we made a deal. She popped up and she had a cell phone, called a trooper and said, I need an escort down the street. I rode in there too, and we had such fun. We sat on the back. Finally, she went up front, and Jeff and his shotgun rider up there, she got in between them, and she was waving and going down the street. And we had the dedication, and it was just an outstanding time there at Dodge City. And Ogallala we went out to the famous Haythorne Ranch, which is one of the largest ranches in the U.S. that raise quarter horses. And they had us out to the ranch, and we had dinner, and they had about 50 descendants of trail drivers. Most of them were Texas. I mean, came from Texas, and a lot of them stayed. And they came, and it was amazing to meet all these people. And we did learn as we went up the trail that most everybody had a Texan in their family tree. And we told the district governor in North Dakota that we would be there when he had his conference. Well, it was May 1st. And we promised him we'd be there. So only ones that could go, because of May Day, were two district governors. And they came through Vernon and picked me up. And when we left, it was May 1st and warm and beautiful. And by the time we were going to Rapid City, one of them was a retired Air Force pilot. So he could stay on the base, and we could get rooms there. At about, an hour's drive before we got to Rapid City, the temperature started dropping. And it dropped 30 degrees by the time we got there. And bad weather moved in, and the next morning they had blowing snow, and no traffic was moving north. And we had promised we would be there. And so we got in and headed out, and Dave Mason was driving, the Air Force pilot. And he was a good driver, nobody else on the road. And a snow plow came on the other side, and we hollered at him, and he said, nobody's going that direction. And we said, we are. He said, but you get out of it on up there. So we ventured on, and we got to North Dakota, Medora, and it's at the North Dakota Cowboy Hall of Fame. And the governor was there, and they had moved it all in, and they had a second big banquet hall on the second floor. So we went up there and had the dedication with the governor, and it was just amazing. And the Rotary District governor was the retired president of the North Dakota University. And so he had a lot of, and he had his conference, and we had people there from, he'd brought a bus from Bismarck for them to come down, and from Canada. And it was a beautiful experience, and we said, we had dinner with them. We got there about 3, and at 9 o'clock we left and started south. We said, we've got to get out of here before it's coming this way. So we took off and went to Fort Pierre, South Dakota. About 3 a.m. we stopped and slept 2 or 3 hours, and we saw all the roads were closed going west. And we got up and headed on south, and there was another snowstorm came in that didn't even show up. And we drove all the way back to Vernon. Sun was out, sun shining, and they were like, well, that was kind of a fast trip, wasn't it? And I said, yes. We laugh about that, and these two Rotary District governors have just been my wonderful friends. I went to, Dave and Vonda Mason moved to Arkansas to a retirement place, and I went to visit them. They took me to visit the Crystal Museum, and just a beautiful place. And Jim Aniff likes to travel to Europe and has Rotary friends, and so in November I went to Amsterdam, and Jim was there, and we rode the train to Germany, Ulsan, and spent the night with his friends that are Rotarians, but they're Germans. And we stayed with them, and then they drove us, all of them and their son, and Jim and I, to Geneva, and we went to Rotary Day at the UN in Geneva, Switzerland.
Very nice.
And we stayed in an Airbnb for 3 nights, and my cost was $103.
Oh my gosh.
And the hotels there were like $300 to $500.
That's what I've always heard about Geneva.
And I couldn't believe how lucky we were. But Marja and Helmut Ritterfeld know how, I mean, they speak German and Dutch and English, and all of that has come because I started here at New Mexico Junior College, and because I couldn't say no. And it's amazing when you can't say no, and you do know how to admit you don't know something, but you're willing to learn.
Right.
What experiences and all the things, all of this opened up all of these experiences for me. My daughter is Leslie Benge Lauder. She married Steve Lauder, and his family was pioneer family in Clayton, New Mexico, and they had a ranch, and his mother was from early day pioneer ranch family. So he's salt of the earth, and I thought, my daughter went to New Mexico State, and so did Steve, and she was there 3 years, and she was living in an apartment, and I went to visit, and she said, Mom, walked down and looked in the door. That's the man I'm going to marry sitting on that couch. And I said, does he know it? And she said, no. But they married and have 2 beautiful grandsons that are now both married. And they have, the oldest one, my daughter was a longtime educator. She worked her way up in the Amarillo system and the Canyon school system and became assistant superintendent, and she's my daughter, but I can brag on her anyway. She's a magnificent educator. She was the kind, if the teachers weren't teaching right for the students and they were not doing their job, they didn't get by with it. And she even, she told me, she said, I have some attorneys on speed dial, but they don't get by with not treating these students right and educating them. And so her son, Ross got a computer programming degree from Texas Tech. And their baby son, Clay Lauder, got his in electrical engineering. And Leslie wrote a computer program, wrote the content, and Ross put together software, and he started a software company. And now they have this software that Plan for Learning, and it's sold to Texas schools so that all of the state and federal laws they have to comply with are on drop-down menus, and they can put it in, and if somebody comes to check it, all they have to do is open it up and look at it. And they've been very successful with it. And Clay married a really fine girl from Dallas, and she's in investments and working on her CFA. She just lacks one test, finishing that. And Ross married valedictorian who went to Baylor on a scholarship. Now they have 2 little girls and a little boy. And my son is married Stacy Bella from Lovington. And he had
What's your son's name?
John Rayburn.
John. Okay.
And it's Raburn, Benge. And he had 3 children, 3 sons. I have 5 grandsons, no granddaughters.
Wow, yeah.
And his first 2 were by Kim, can't think of her last name now, Wilcox, yes. And then they divorced, and he married Stacy Bella, who's from Lovington. Mm-hmm. And she had 3 children, and then they have 1 boy. So that's my 5th grandson, and he's a junior in high school at Athens. So I moved from Vernon to Fort Worth, my town of choice. None of them live. I said, I want to live in Cowtown. That fits me. And it has. I love it. And my Rotary Club is one of the largest ones in the world. We have 450 members. But it's been a really good, I live downtown in an apartment. So that's why I wanted downtown.
Yes.
And I joined the First Presbyterian Church, and I'd been a Baptist, but I was several of the Rotarians and said, we would like for you to come visit us. We're right downtown and easy access. And I went and I thought, I just feel loved in this church. And it has been a very loving church. It felt right. And I feel like you should feel right when you go to a church, and that you have that good feeling when you're with people who live what they believe. And that, to me, is where life is. If you don't have that, you kind of wander off different places. Not to say that I haven't had problems along the way, but I find great joy in what I've done. And I still get emails from students from Hobbs High School, junior college. It's just amazing, beautiful life. I just feel like
You've been blessed.
I have been blessed. Yes, I have. Very blessed. And I'm so pleased to be back and to have someone say, tell us about what you've done. Because Lea County is a place of champions, because there are people who know how to do things, they're willing to try it, they pay attention, they don't ask somebody else to do it, they do it themselves. And it's been, and I felt like they built the college here for me. When it came time to go to college, it was here. And my life had just been that way, you know. If you expect it, it happens. And the quality of it, I mean, it wasn't just, it's the quality of this place, and it still is. And I drove around the campus and looked, and I thought, oh, it has expanded and serving so many different needs. And to me, community colleges, 2-year schools, are the heart of America, because they're educating, I always like to say, the comfort and security people among all the others. I like to have people taking care of my heater and my air conditioner. And I like policemen and nurses and all of those, plus the fact, like me, I got my 2 years and went off to Eastern, and I discovered when I got there, I was totally prepared for Eastern.
Well said, thank you.
And it's a mark of quality, this college, and to see how many people have come from here and succeeded with the education they started here, with many different things. So this is my home. It's always nice to come back again and meet new people like you and discover our commonality. And that's what, marking the Great Western Trail, we discovered with from Mexico to Canada, my rotary pin here with the longhorn on it. Jose Luis, a Mexican from Leon, Mexico, had them made and sent them to me and said, give them to every Rotarian who's helping with marking this trail project, because you did not forget Mexico. And we want to thank you. And when Ray Clinging-Smith was Rotary International president, and his year was, theme was cowboy logic and cowboy ethics. And he said, I want to be a part of your project. And he wanted a photo shoot at Brownsville at one of the posts. And two of the Rotary International directors came. One was from Mexico City, near there, and he came. And I called Jose Luis and said, please come, I would like for you to give these pins out. And he said, I hope I can come. My wife died 3 weeks ago. And I'm just not sure for several reasons. He showed up. And he's in our picture at the photo shoot. And it was significant for all of us. But that's what it was all the way, was everybody felt this commonality of the Western way of life, of the code of the cowboy, and everybody discovered that the four-way test of Rotary is just simply a cowboy code in different words. And we feel that why the trail project went so well is because it was the people in their own land designating, finding the path, and all of a sudden discovering the whole trail was unified with the commonality of the businesses. And even rodeo is up and down. And with met quite a few of them that they came from Canada to rodeo. When we went to Regina, I sat by a young man at the table, and he was the head of the Agribition Center, Canadian Agribition Center in Regina, which is the second largest livestock exhibition in the United States, other than Denver. And they have like many nations that come and show animals. And the president of it was sitting there by me, and he said, I understand you're from Vernon. And I said, I am. And he said, my brother he rodeoed at Vernon College.
Never know, do you?
And I thought, there you go, right there, the connections. But they're connections with people. When you connect, you know what they are. And it's I think the strength of our country. When we went to Saskatchewan, and they took us on a tour, and several from Texas said, well, you'd think we were in Texas if we didn't know it. It looks just like Texas. And they even had a tornado in the background. We could see it over there. And we said, we may be in Texas. But the commonality that joined all of us together, plus Rotary, the power of Rotary, made it the most amazing experience. And we talked to the different states to have them submit to their congressional elected officials to make the two trails, Chisholm Trail and Great Western Trail, as National Historic Trails. And everybody worked on it, and then I happened through my daughter, who was going to hear Kay Bailey Hutchison, said, "Come go with me, Mom. I've got to go school business." And I thought, opportunity. And I went up and handed her my business card, and I said, "We need your help." And she was then still in Congress. And I said, for the Chisholm Trail and the Great Western Trail, National Historic Trails. And I said, "We've had this project." And I told her briefly. And she said, "Here, you contact my aide, we'll get that done." And it was no time that it was put before the Senate, and they had approved it in Oklahoma. Took it through the House, and it was approved, and President Obama signed it on March 30th, 2009, and I just happened to see it on C-SPAN and saw him sign it.
Wow.
And when the Park Service in Santa Fe, it was assigned for them to do the research on it. And they had to, he worked on it a while, the historian, but then the Cultural Committee in Washington, D.C. made up PhDs from different universities around the U.S. There were 13 of them. And I thought, well, that's public, I'm going. So I went, nobody else could go, and I went, and when Frank Norris asked me if I'd like to say something, well, sure I did. And I stood up and I told him about our project and why this had been placed there, and about the importance of the trail and the beef and you know, the economy, turning it around with the Civil War veterans coming home to South Texas, and most of them are very, very young. And this entrepreneur, McCoy, saw the vision. You know, we depend on entrepreneurs, and the new transportation was the railroad, and he talked to them and asked them to put together in Kansas a spur line so he could load cattle in. And he knew that the Easterners had learned to love beef, and he knew about the feral longhorns, millions of them, and he sent flyers to South Texas and said, "Walk the product to Kansas." So they rounded up 2,500, 3,500 head of feral cattle, which belonged to no one, and headed them north. And the beauty of it, they paid them in gold.
Wow.
There wasn't any paper money. And, you know, you had it. And a lot of them went home and started their ranches. The Wagner Ranch was started then. The YO Ranch was started then. The King Ranch had already been started, but they sent a lot of cattle up and made a lot of money off of it. And so was the Haythorne Ranch in Nebraska was started then. So it was our history, and it changed from the cotton culture in the South to the cattle culture in Texas and New Mexico and the Great Plains states. And you know, all of the businesses that are still spin-offs from the cattle and the horse industry, and it's an amazing thing. And Kay Bailey Hutchison recognized it, and she got it through. And I have sent the Rotary magazine with our article to all of the our state representatives in Texas, and I have had a long email list that I keep communicating with. Like the governor of North Dakota is now a senator in Congress. And I sent him a book, and I said, "We'd like for you to support this. I know you do." And it's amazing when you have Rotarians. And my book, when it came out at Texas Tech, they had a book signing, and it was also a fundraiser for the their university press. And it was $100 a plate dinner, and the president of Texas Tech spoke, and the Eastern New Mexico University president was there.
Oh, nice.
And I was signing books, and I told them, I said, "We need to have this approved to have these trails designated." And they all wrote letters. And I was so pleased to, from Eastern and from Texas Tech. So we're waiting. That will be a day to celebrate if that happens. So